From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Thank you very much, Ollie. Welcome to Monday's programme. I've had an amazing day, me. Very busy, very crazy day. Made it back in time for you, though. It's the Richie Allen Show, of course. What else would it be? October 21st, 2019. I am Richie Allen. It's been a nice day here in Salford and Greater Manchester. Tony Gosling from BCFM, the politics show, joins the programme this hour. Lots to talk about with him. And as usual, it's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. If you'd like to contribute yourself, I'll be reading your tweets out as we go along.
Well, bring out the gimp.
It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Yes, welcome. Tony Gosling, as I've just mentioned, will join me. We'll talk about... We're not going to dwell on the Brexit shenanigans, chicanery, and all of that. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. And I think you'll find it very interesting. Tony joins me this hour. And a little bit later on in the programme, I had a lovely email from a woman called Emma Clancy, who's very interested in vaccines. And she asked me to revisit something that was on the Richie Allen radio show about 2 years ago, back in September 2017. And I'd forgotten all about it. Very interesting stuff. We're going to kind of rewind. We're going to go back to the past, or back to the future, as it were, a bit later on in this programme. I think you'll find that fascinating this Monday. Thanks for your company. As always, good to be with you. I hope you had a lovely weekend and that you're in good form, as it were. In good form because, well, there's no reason. Well, there's plenty of reason. But there's no point dwelling on it. Get on with it. That's what we say. Improvise, adapt and overcome. Monday it is. Brexit, you're sick of it, so am I. We are sick of it because we know what's going to happen. But maybe it's important. And I'd like your thoughts on this. Please tweet me with your thoughts. Maybe it is important. Maybe... in terms of, it might demonstrate to people whom were previously in the dark, maybe, or unaware, maybe, of their reality, and that they don't live in anything that resembles a democracy. Maybe it's important. Maybe in some years to come, both of us will look back, me and you, me and thee, we'll look back and say, that was a good time, that, because that eventually lit some sort of a fire under people's backsides, when they realise they're just being laughed at by the establishment, you know? So maybe it's very important. And maybe there should be no despondency. Maybe everything has a purpose. I don't know. Anyway, as you probably know, the government wanted Parliament to vote on Boris Johnson's wretched withdrawal agreement, the one he reached with the European Union last week. Well, they wanted to vote on it today, did the government. They wanted to vote on it on Saturday. But an amendment by Sir Oliver Letwin, which passed the House, meant there was no vote on it Saturday. So the government wanted a vote on the withdrawal agreement today. Disarvo, as they say in Australia. Mad Australians, disarvo. Disarvo. But the Speaker, John Bercow, wouldn't let them. No. Wouldn't let them. He refused the government request to hold a yes or no vote on the Brexit deal. Bercow said a motion on the deal had already been brought before MPs on Saturday, and it would be repetitive and disorderly to debate it again. Just to remind you, Saturday's sitting extraordinary, the first time on Saturday since the Falklands War. Yeah. So an amended motion, amended by Oliver Letwin, nodded through by MPs, which basically withheld approval of Johnson's deal until it has been passed into law. Here's John Bercow explaining himself today. I keep doing this, don't I? Oh, God. I don't even have an excuse today. Anyway, let's try that again. Here's Bercow explaining himself today.
Today's motion is in substance the same as Saturday's motion, and the House has decided the matter. Today's circumstances are in substance the same as Saturday's circumstances. My ruling is therefore that the motion will not be debated today, as it would be repetitive and disorderly to do so. For the benefit of colleagues not closely familiar with the so-called Same Question Convention, which is very strong and dates back to 1604, I will summarise the rationale for it in a sentence. It is a necessary rule to ensure the sensible use of the House's time and proper respect for the decisions that it takes.
Hear, hear. Now, Sir Bernard Jenkin and a number of other Tories accused Bercow of Remain bias, saying that it was, quote, remarkable, end quote, how often Bercow pleased one lot and not the other. That's a quotation as well. They said it is most unusual for a speaker, Jenkin did, so often to prevent the government having a debate on the matters which the government wishes put before the House. And fellow Tory David T.C. Davies said the only consistency one can find in your rulings is that they always seem to favour one side of the argument and never the government. Got a bit heated, so it did. And after it got a bit heated, Bercow sought to clarify and, well, he said he would make no apology for doing his job.
And it's very important, not just for members, or even particularly for members in the House, but for those observing our proceedings. Nothing in what I have said in any way impinges upon the opportunity for the government to secure approval of its deal and the passage of the appropriate legislation by the end of the month. If the government have got the numbers, the government can have their way, and it's not for the Speaker to interfere. The judgment I've made is about the importance of upholding a very long-standing and overwhelmingly observed convention of this House. That is what I've done, and I make absolutely no apology for it whatsoever.
Yes, and there's been a big reaction to this. What next, you ask? Do I hear you ask what next? Who knows? An extension? Well, Boris Johnson did write letters, and apparently whether he signed them or not doesn't make a jot of difference. He did send letters to Brussels, over the weekend, requesting an extension, as he was compelled to do by the Ben Act after the Letwin Amendment passed on Saturday. Letwin, Ben, is it confusing, is it? Well, it's not really. And that's where we are. So an extension beyond October 31st until early next year, highly probable. And in the interim period, an election, also highly probable. But what the hell do I know? All I'm certain of is, as we approach 11 minutes past the hour, well, the UK is not going to leave the European Union. Not properly. Not in any way, shape or form. Are you fed up of it now, you are? I do get these, it does make me laugh, I do get these emails. Fed up of it, Rich? I know. But like I said earlier on, maybe it'll serve its purpose in the very near future, because maybe it is waking people. I've never been fond of this waking people up nonsense. You know, I'm awake and you're not, and sheeple and all that crap. Because as I've learned during my years traversing the independent media, many of those who most proclaim themselves to be awake are often the most asleep and the most stubborn and the most unwilling to consider other points of view. But anyway, the media is becoming more and more surreal, isn't it, as we go along, as we progress in life, in terms of the stories that it covers. You know, we see a lot. I did rant about this. Maybe I over-ranted this morning on the YouTube live stream. I'm still doing that, by the way, if that's your bag, in the mornings between 9:30 and about 10:15, although I was a bit earlier this morning. Between Monday to Thursday, I do look through the UK papers on YouTube for a few giggles. I did maybe over-rant a bit this morning, but I was talking about how gender, how sexual politics, gender politics, identity politics, the politics of minorities versus majority and all that stuff, they're really kind of permeating our kind of national media and entering our discourse increasingly. A lot of stories, like if you go through the tabloids or if you go through the broadsheets, increasingly you see more and more and more of these weird stories about somebody taking umbrage at somebody or some organisation for something that they are horrified by. And these are stories that they wouldn't ever see the light of day in the past. Like, here's one for you today. Just made me laugh. It's a great example. There's a singer called Maggie Rogers. Now, I'm so disconnected. As a big ignorant baldy gammon bollocks as I am, obviously. You know, we all know that. I'm very much disconnected with current trends in music. Music. Gotta say music. I haven't a clue. My record collection goes to the early noughties, maybe. Anyway, so I haven't a clue. So Maggie Rogers is a singer. And she's getting a lot of press coverage today, particularly this afternoon, because somebody shouted out at one of her recent gigs. One of the fans shouted out, "Take your top off," when she was singing. And then somebody else said, "Yeah, take your top off." I would have thought now that if you have the courage to sit in front of an audience and sing your songs, that you'd be pretty thick-skinned, right? But apparently not. So Maggie took to Twitter. And this is what fascinates me, because these appear to be nothing stories. But they're not, of course, important stories. But they're given blanket coverage. You have to wonder why. Now she says, and this is a direct quotation, her feelings have been hurt. Her feelings have been hurt by a fan who shouted, "Take your top off," while she was singing on stage. She's 25. She was in Austin in Texas performing when she says the man yelled out the comment. And this is what she said: "I step on stage every night and give every part of me." She writes this on Twitter because this is where you go to emote, to pour forth, to pour out your feelings about stuff. "I step on stage every night and give every part of me. There is no space for harassment or disrespect or degradation of any kind at my show." Maggie says what makes it worse is she was singing about gratitude, growth and change when it happened. The singer claims she heard a man yell, "Take your top off," before another one joined in and shouted, "You're cute though." So she says, "I was stunned, furious, fuming, confused." She was confused. I mean, get your tits out for the lads. How confusing is it? You know what I mean? It's an invitation. It's a motion to remove one stop. "It really hurt my feelings," she said. "I step on stage every night, give every part of me, and my community shows up every night, and together we create a safe space to amplify each other."
What kind of fuckery are you?
Yeah, what kind of fuckery are you is right. No such thing as a safe space at a concert. Jesus wept. Stunned, furious, confused. My community. Jesus wept. So what do you do in the lights? Oh, God. So in honour of Maggie, what's her surname again? In honour of Maggie Rogers and everybody else who likes to go on to Twitter or Instagram, talk about their community and harassment and safe space, here's something just for you.
Get your tits out, get your tits out, get your tits out for the lads. Get your tits out for the lads. Get your tits out, get your tits out, get your tits out for the lads. Get your tits out for the lads. Get your tits out, get your tits out, get your tits out for the lads. Get your tits out for the lads.
Right, and I want to dedicate that to Jess Phillips and Stella Creasy of the Labour Party. Mad times. The fact that it gets that much coverage, that's what's really interesting about it. Prince William is worried about his brother Harry after an ITV interview. This is all over the media today. Honest to God, the BBC. Apparently Prince Harry gave an interview to ITV along with his wife, and they talked about how they're struggling to cope with the enormity of being them. It's all over the news today, clips of it being played. I'm not going to subject you to any of the clips either. And his brother, Prince William, has said he's worried about Harry after the ITV interview. Why is this interesting, Richie? You don't ordinarily subject us to this shite. It's tabloid nonsense. Well, because these people, these princes and their wives, are basically the face of mental health programming in the UK. And by mental health programming, I mean the agenda to convince everybody in the country that whether they want to accept it or not, they've got some sort of mental health issue that they're dealing with. They want people to come forward and to receive adulation as you admit that you have at one time or another dealt with a mental health problem. So it's very interesting that this guy, Harry, and his wife are travelling around Africa talking at every opportunity about how they're struggling and how they have struggled with mental health at a time when they used a willing media, a very willing media, to go along with this agenda to convince us all that we're not well psychologically, there's something wrong with us. And we need to consider that. And we need to be upfront about it. We need to tell people, including our employers and our friends and our family and all the rest of its crazy stuff. Recently, you will have seen some of the UK's biggest television programmes stop broadcasting for 30 seconds or for a minute to tell people to think about mental health in their homes. There's enough to drive you mad, I tells you. 19 minutes past the hour. If you were offended by that piece of music I played a minute ago, by the way, I couldn't give an arse. That's how it goes. What else is there to tell you about today? Not a lot going on, to be honest. It's pretty much Brexit. It's Brexit centric, of course, and it will be until this thing collapses and there's a long extension and there's an election cycle. Outside of that, little bit of chat in the media today about legislation passing in Northern Ireland, which will see abortion decriminalised and same-sex marriage will be legalised in Northern Ireland. And I do have some conservative right. I don't know why I call them conservative right. I get some alt-right listeners, which is good. Maybe they listen because I have entertained guests on the programme who've got an alt-right kind of point of view, and they do listen. And I know they've got very strong opinions about abortion and gay marriage and stuff like that. On the abortion thing, I've got very mixed feelings about it, as you know. On the same-sex marriage thing, same-sex couples have every right and should have every right under the law. Every right, as much as you have, to get married if they want to. And I've always said that, and I'll never change as that either. Very interesting story in Ireland about asylum seekers. I'm going to bring you a bit later on. There's also some interesting stuff in the papers that I was going to get into this morning that I didn't, but really interesting stuff. We'll get into it a bit later on in the programme. And I had an amazing email from a lady called Emma Clancy, who's just become a mother. And she's asked me not to say where she's from, and I won't do that. But her email is interesting, and it's about vaccine consent, but it's also about an episode of the programme that was broadcast a couple of years ago, which I'd forgotten all about. And we'll get into that a little bit later on in the programme as well. I've had a crazy old day. Just about got here today, by the way. Just about made it on air. I said if I don't, there'll be murders. There will be murders. Richie, It's the one day of the week you don't want to miss Monday, because people assume. You know, if you go missing on a Monday, people assume, he was pissed up on Sunday. He's hungover. But no, I could genuinely have missed the programme today. There was that much going on privately. But I'm glad I didn't. Tony Gosling joins the programme in a couple of minutes. After this, from the Beach Boys on your Richie Allen Show. Welcome to the programme. Good to be with you. Yes, the Beach Boys on the Richie Allen Show. Wouldn't it be good? From Pet Sounds, of course. Do you have Pet Sounds in your collection? You do? You do? You should have. Pretty fantastic album that. Tony Gosling is standing by. He'll join us in a minute. Let me just remind you, you can tweet the programme. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. At Richie Allen Show on Twitter. At Richie Allen Show on Twitter. That's the one. Right, so, hang on a second. All right, yeah, okay. Get a tune ready. Got to get a tune ready, you know. This is all the sort of stuff. I normally have all this stuff done before going to air, but I literally just got in just before coming on. And so as I was chatting with you in the monologue there, I was still doing stuff. Yeah, I was doing stuff, so I was. Yeah, good stuff, yeah. Somebody said to me, when are the clocks changing, Rich? They're changing in the UK this coming Saturday night, or Sunday morning, I should say, really. They go back by an hour. They go back by an hour. So the clocks do. They go back by an hour. And then the week later, it's America. And I know I'm not getting caught again. This year, I'm not getting caught out. I always do. Invariably, I get caught out. And I mess up an interview because I schedule an American guest around about the time the clocks change. And I don't realise even that they haven't changed, or they have changed in America or whatever. So there you are. So I know this time around, 25 minutes, it is past the hour. Waiting for Tony Gosling to join us. Tony Gosling. So there you go. Right. So nothing on Brexit then from you. You're not interested. I was asking you a bit earlier on about the whole Brexit betrayal, what that will mean in the future, in the near future. Will it be a boon, really, for those of us who want to show people, you know, the reality that they don't live in a democratic state, that they never have done? Will it be? It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. I'm trying to connect with Tony now. There he is. Let's welcome him back to the programme. Terrific guy, great guest. He's been on my shows for years now. He's the host of the Politics Show at BCFM, thisweek.org.uk. And he's the man to go to if you want to learn about all things Bilderberg. And you've got to know about Bilderberg. You know, entry level. If you want to introduce somebody to secret societies in the Bilderberg group, Bilderberg.org, Tony Gosling, terrific guy, former BBC journalist, joins me live on the line from Bristol now. Tony, welcome.
It's funny that I'm a former BBC journalist, Richie, isn't it? Since I was going on about the Bilderbergs.
Since you were going on about the Bilderbergs. And the newspapers are full of stories today about Nicky Morgan, the culture secretary, advocating the abolition of the licence fee and using quotes from people like Andrew Marr, who say that the BBC is now just a biased liberal organisation full of young people, full of gay and lesbian people, and, you know, anti-Brexit and all the rest of it. Interesting times. Do you see that happening, Tony, the abolition of the TV licence?
Well, I think it actually would be a pity, which is a strange thing to say. Let's just think about, I mean, the way media works is basically it's like a factory. And it's easy for someone to buy up a factory. Very, very simple for a banker to just, press a button, make up £1 billion, dollars, euros, whatever, and buy it up. You can't do that with the BBC. And we've got a tremendous amount of bias there. But one thing, I really have to say, is that certainly in the regions, the BBC is basically the only media that listens to anything to do with what ordinary people think. I mean, I think network BBC, that's, radio, BBC 1, 2, 4, and, Radio 1, 2, 3, 4, all that stuff, and 5 Live, they're very strictly biased and controlled, and they have been increasingly over the last, so we say 20, 25 years. Almost every week we see a bit more bias. But, the fact is that if the BBC was as biased as, say, Sky, which is now owned by the US, we would have no independent media, broadcast media at all in the country. So, I mean, it's horribly flawed, but I really do support the idea of a state-run broadcaster, because the thing is, if we elect a decent government at some point in the next 20, 30 years, everything could change at the BBC. It could really open up again and start to do proper journalism, which is by basically looking at both sides, looking at all angles on a story and reporting all angles. And we've seen, obviously, over the last 25 years, as I said, very, very little of that on all sorts of issues like climate change, the causes of climate change, what action is needed over climate change, the whole sort of discussion and debate over spirituality, creation versus evolution, whether Muslims were behind 9/11 and 7/7 or not, whether Iran sponsors all Middle East terror, whether changing your sex is good or normal, whether there's a rule of law for banksters, whether, Thomas Cook just accidentally collapsed, or whether there were massive bets going on to say that it would collapse and people made a lot of money out of that collapse. The British Army in Ireland, whether those people should be prosecuted, the whole thing of the rule of law, we get absolutely no real balance at a national level on any of those subjects. But that's not the BBC, just the BBC. That's everybody. That's ITN, that's Sky, ITN do ITV News and Channel 4 News. And almost all the broadcast media in this country is saying those things. And the BBC, at some point in the future, could become Basically, like when I arrived, back in 1989, when I started working there, it was absolutely, everything that they did, at least there was an attempt to get both sides. For example, the first Gulf War. We got a guy on Greater London Radio, which goes out to all the Londoners, who was a supporter of Saddam Hussein. If you can imagine that sort of thing happening now, say we declare war on Afghanistan and we get somebody on who's, pro-Afghanistan, it just simply wouldn't happen now. It's become a propaganda service, but, it's flawed. But I still think that it's got a role, and particularly in the regions, outside London, Manchester, Scotland, Wales, the West Country where I am, you do get some really actually very good reporting.
Tony, it wouldn't be so necessary in the regions if the government had prevented companies like Global and Bauer buying up every regional commercial radio station in the country, because those old radio stations, and that's where I began, those radio stations, every one of them had a mid-morning talk programme, and it was produced and presented by people whom, were, as you described, desperately keen to get both sides of every story. But since Global and Bauer and others came in, none of those radio stations now have got any mid-morning talk programmes. They're music-driven shows, with the only talk show outside of BBC Radio in the country now being LBC and Talk Radio. So I hear what you're saying, and I do agree with you. But if it wasn't for the death of plurality in this country through, again, massive corporations buying the local commercial stations, we wouldn't maybe be in the mess that we're in, or it wouldn't be as noticeable. What do you think?
Well, the big privatiser, okay, so obviously Margaret Thatcher started the ball rolling, the snowball. The big privatiser is a certain chap, he is basically the high priest of privatisation and always has been in the Conservative Party, and obviously listened to by the Blairites in the Labour Party, the neocon Labour Party, New Labour, and that lot, is a certain chap called Oliver Letwin.
Yeah.
And he obviously has been very, very significant since this whole Brexit parliamentary process, which shouldn't really be happening, actually. It's only this Gina Miller that's forced it to happen. It should be, people forget this, treaties like this should be negotiated directly by the government without Parliament having any say in it, because that's the way treaties are always worked. And in fact, even with the Lisbon Treaty, they changed it to become the EU constitution so that it would have to be, or it would be less likely to be voted on. Then they called it the Lisbon Treaty, so that it wouldn't have to be voted on. So, this is something which the government should be able to just get on and organise and come back to Parliament and say, we've done it. So get one vote in Parliament like we had with the Article 50 vote, and then just get on with it. But we've had this ridiculous engagement of Parliament with every little line in the treaty, which of course is totally impractical. It just doesn't work. So that's, I suppose, why we are where we are with all this. We're stuck in the mud, basically, with Parliament, with the Brexit business. But Letwin has played a very, very key role, as anyone who looks at it can see. He is a former employee. Basically, he's just an agent of NM Rothschild and Sons in the Conservative Party. He's a former employee of Jacob Rothschild and NM Rothschilds, and we know that these are some of the most powerful bankers in the city of London, and probably the organisation with one of the widest scopes over the centuries that's been looking to bring power to itself, aggrandise power, and take power over governments, over our free press, buying it up, involved in influencing the media and our democratic process over the centuries. And it's no surprise to me to see him doing this amendment yesterday, on Saturday, which has now meant, as we've heard today, that Bercow has thrown out any possibility of even debating Boris's deal, which seems to me like they're being set up for a no deal. So we've got Juncker is supposed to be leaving on the 31st, and a new commission coming in on the 1st of November. But that's not happening because a bunch of the commissioners who've been sponsored by Macron, etc., the MEPs have said, we're not having these commissioners because there's financial irregularities. There's a whole load of the new commission, even the senior people who have financial irregularities, including, of course, although she's not actually a commissioner, she's probably more powerful. That's the head of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, with her conviction for fraud, which she didn't go to jail for. Amazingly, she managed to, skip jail on that one. So we've got a whole bunch of fraudsters that they're trying to put in charge of Europe at the EU, the commissioners, and the MEPs have thrown it out. So it means that Juncker has got to stay on until the end of November at least in order to actually get a commission in place to take over. But Juncker, that's a really important point, is Juncker really wants to get Brexit done with. So I don't think, Richie, he's even interested in leaving anything for the new commission to deal with. He wants it finished. And when he leaves, he's going to say, well, everyone, nobody has to deal with my toxic legacy of Brexit after I'm gone. So we could well be seeing, no extension from the EU and what they call a crash out. It's amazing how, news services all over the world say crashing out without a deal. Well, why is it crashing out? All it is we're leaving with no legal ties to the EU anymore. No European Court of Justice, none of that. We're going to start rebuilding our trade relations with the EU. And also, of course, there's going to be a transition agreement anyway. So it will be a nice, smooth transition. I think that's what's going to happen because it seems to me that Letwin has been part of an operation to deliberately stop Parliament voting for this deal. So we have a no deal on the 31st.
I don't agree. I think they will grant an extension. I think there isn't anything.
Well, give us your take, yeah.
I think they will. I think an extension is inevitable. I don't think there's anything that Boris Johnson can do about that. He might have asked them not to grant the extension, but they will grant the extension, I think, until, if not the end of January next year, maybe the end of April next year. I think it's inevitable. And this will end up in a general election cycle where the only issue on the table is Brexit. I think that's what is going to happen. I think you made a very good case for Jean-Claude Juncker's thinking, and you made a good argument, but I also think that very powerful forces, Tony, behind the European Union, they couldn't allow the United Kingdom to leave with no deal whatsoever. They couldn't, because the United...
Well, let me tell you why.
Well, I didn't finish. Let me finish just briefly. I left you have a good say there. Let me just briefly finish, and then you just come right back in. The European Union, Tony, is a massive stepping stone on the way to a one-world government. There are forces behind the European Union, names and faces, and people have never seen. They have no idea who they are. No country will ever be allowed to leave. This is why they've got all of these little stumbling blocks like Article 50, the 2-year negotiation period. Then if you do leave, you've got the implementation period to give plenty of time for a new government to come in. They're just not going to let us tea. So I'll tell you what I think, and then you have the floor again. There will be an extension granted by the European Union, and that will pave the way then for an election. You think you might be running out of time for an election now, but I wouldn't be surprised if we had one in November. Go ahead.
Well, look, I think their one world government is dead in the water, Richie. It was certainly looking feasible up until around about 2000 when Putin took over. But he's really made sure that Russia is a very powerful independent force in the world. And in a way, it's sort of balancing force between China and the West.
Yeah.
So I think they may. The only thing I think that the New World Order, the oligarchy, the elite, whatever you want to call them in the West here, the owners of our country, of our land, of our capital, the only thing I think that they can really try and do now is to force a war with China in order to try and win that and dominate. That's their only option, I think. And if Britain does leave, they can feel satisfied by kicking us in the short and curlies and by destroying the pound. By destroying the pound, they'll make it clear this is what happens if you leave our club. And then we may even be in a situation where in a few years down the line with, say, Corbyn in power or whatever, that we're begging to come back to the EU again. You
might be right, Tony. We're going to have to wait and see. Obviously, the next few days are going to be fascinating. I mean, it's the 21st today. In 10 days' time, the country is supposed to be leaving. But look, it's important to point out as well, the withdrawal agreement negotiated by Johnson and his team is worse than what May presented. And it isn't any deal, of course. People don't understand this. That agreement with the European Union is a divorce agreement. It is not a deal, as you said yourself a minute ago. It's not a deal on future trading terms. It's not a deal on movement of people. It's not a deal on fisheries. It isn't, and people don't understand that. It's I don't know whether they deliberately complicate this for people in the media or not. I don't know, but it's going to be frantic over the next few days. I have no doubt about that. And look, I take your point on board about the one world government maybe being dead in the water, and I understand the reasoning behind what you said, and I think you've got a good point there. But look, speaking about conflicts with China, speaking with conflicts with Russia, you've got Guy Verhofstadt and senior German members of the European Parliament constantly tweeting, saying things like, Tony, well, this is proof that we need a European army. The Americans have screwed up Syria. We need a European army to deal with this. Russia is encroaching. We need a European army. These are the arguments they're making to keep the UK inside the European Union. So some future conflict with Russia and China maybe, but with the European Union, Tony, central to that conflict maybe.
Well, yeah, but you remember we've got NATO in the background still, also based in Brussels, where, I mean, if anything was to happen, you'd almost certainly find Britain in lockstep with the Europeans and with the US in a military way. But we've got to keep a very close eye on this whole European Defence Union, because that's come in since we had the referendum. Ursula von der Leyen, the new president of Europe, and, you know, they don't like to call them that on the mainstream news, but that's what they were 4 or 5 years ago. They were saying, oh, we can now call them the president of Europe. Now the EU is, you know, fully fledged. And she is going to be the new president of Europe, taking over from Juncker, of course, not elected, appointed. But I think that her mission is definitely going to be to unite the armed forces. And I think this is one of the reasons we've had this whole Brexit business over here, is because our armed forces just simply do not want to be under the command of a foreign general. And they don't want to put, you know, people from Britain under their command. And that's actually, I think, probably what's precipitated this whole business, although you won't read that in a Daily Telegraph. No. It's almost written between the lines. So I think that's effectively what's going on with it. And I would be very surprised if we do have an extension or anything like that, Richie, honestly. I mean, we'll see what happens, because I think they've decided someone needs to be made an example of, whether it was Greece or Italy or Spain. I mean, Catalonia, we haven't mentioned. That whole business down there is horrific. Locking up politicians for actually doing what they said they'd do. I mean, God, our politicians half the time don't say what they said they do, and they get off scot-free. But in Catalonia, when they do what they've said before a referendum or election, then they get locked up for it. Unbelievable. Yeah,
that's a crazy situation. I spent many years in Spain living there. I understand a little bit about the history of that. What Catalonia is, what it means. I do think, though, not to dwell on this today, because I want to get into diversity with you, because there's some funny stories, and I think there's something a bit deeper going on with the diversity stories in the media. But on the Catalan thing, you know, Tony, look, I agree with you. I'm not going to disagree with anything that you've said, but I think Brussels, I think the European Union and those who prop it up, you know, the main players in Europe, they love this. They want to see states break up. They want to see more and more independence granted within countries, because they mop it up. They wanted Scotland to leave the Union here, to leave the United Kingdom, because the jocks were going to go, well, we'll leave the UK, but we'll then form a very close relationship with the European Union. And I think there is an element in Brussels that loves what's happening in Catalonia. They love it, because they just, well, this is just another state for us. What do you think?
No, I don't agree.
You don't agree, no?
But I can see that one of the things they do like about it is it's a great excuse to bring in a police state.
Yeah.
And, of course, that's what they want all over the place. I mean, what's happened to Julian Assange? I mean, just almost every day I think about this guy. You know, he's actually probably the bravest, most effective investigative journalist we've had for the last 10, 15 years in the West. And so he's not actually done anything wrong, but he's sitting rotting in jail. And we get almost nothing from the hundreds of well-paid staff journalists in this country. We should be screaming this from the rooftops. We don't want to suggest what we do to investigative journalists, stick them in jail when they haven't actually done anything wrong, and then we just turn the other way and forget about it.
You know, Tony, you couldn't have put that any better. If you're working for The Guardian, The Telegraph, whatever, the iPaper, whatever the bloody hell, your whole life is invested in what's happening to Julian Assange. Because it could be you in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. You might publish something that's inconvenient for the government or for some other authority. And before you know it, your laptop's been taken, your computer's been taken. Jesus, Tony, look what's happening in Australia. The national newspapers in Australia this morning printed their Monday morning editions with their front pages redacted to protest against the police in Australia coming after whistleblowers in the media. and confiscating computers from newsrooms in Australia. Jesus, people think we live in a free world. These countries were so virtuous. England, Australia, America were so good and everybody else is so bad. In Australia this morning, the national press went to print with redacted front pages in protest at the tyranny in their country. Crazy.
Well, at least the owners and the editors are wanting to expose this problem. The thing that worries me is here in the UK that we seem to have pliable, compliant editors who, if someone from the military phones them up in the evening and says, well, actually, we hear you're going to be printing this story, we'd rather you didn't. They just simply say, yes, sir, we won't be printing that.
Have you got an example of that, T? First of all, Tony Gosling is our guest, thisweek.org.uk. A rare breed of journalist is Tony, sadly, today, and I mean that sincerely. A rare breed. Can you give us, because I know you've got one or two examples in the recent past where the military, in one guise or another, has asked or tried to compel the press in this country not to print something. Give us an example.
Well, I mean, the most clear and obvious one is over the Skripal case, the Salisbury so-called poisoning, which now looks as if, as I said the previous time I spoke to you, as if this Novichok was actually a fake chemical, potentially. There are people looking into this still, trying to stand the story up, but it could be even a fake chemical which was put out by the Russian intelligence just to flush out who it was that was passing secrets to the West, this being a bogus secret, so they could see if the West had that secret, that it would have come through a particular route, and then they could root out who'd done it. So that was the D-notice on Pablo Miller, who was one of the people involved in all that. And, of course, Miller was also involved in the Litvinenko case. And what the D-notice said was, OK, we don't want any connection, we don't want any mention of Miller in any of the papers. And you know what? They did exactly what they wanted to, and there was very little. Because it started to bubble up in a couple of newspapers, and the military just closed that story down. And we've heard very little of it since in any of the press. So there's a perfect example of just how pliable and compliant our press is. I'd love to see, the sort of thing that, these real debates, the stuff I was talking about kind of at the start there, where you've got some of the real big issues of our time, like, is climate change really man-made? Let's see a decent 2-hour, hour and a half documentary on the BBC about it. Is it man-made or not? With all the main people like Piers Corbyn, you can have all your people from the climate science departments arguing with him, and let the listeners decide. We don't want to be told what to think by the BBC or anybody else.
I'll never forget a couple of years ago, because I did a programme on it, and in fact I invited Piers and he came on. Piers Corbyn was on the Big Questions with Nicky Campbell on Sunday morning 2 years ago on the BBC, and they had Piers on his own, and they had a woman from Friends of the Earth who's not a scientist. They had one of the Green Party guys, I should know his name, he's recently been a co-leader of the Green Party. Anyway, he was on as well, and not a scientist. And at one stage, Nicky Campbell, he had been given less time to Piers Corbyn. And Piers Corbyn was given the microphone, and Piers made a very salient point about CO2 levels in the atmosphere. And I swear to God, and I have the clip, I can play it again later tomorrow, Nicky Campbell looked at the Friends of the Earth woman and the Green Party guy and said, you see, this is what you have to put up with. I'm going to swear, Tony, what the fuck? I would have been fired for that. I would have been fired for that in my time in commercial radio. Did you really do that?
The thing is, by buying up these radio networks and TV networks, the owners believe that it just gives them the right to just transmit through those networks what they think. And, having met some of these Bilderbergers, Richie, they're not nice people, I'm afraid. They have decided what is going to happen. They own our world, and they've decided what's going to happen with it. And for example, I just brought up the word Brexit with Jacob Wallenberg, who's the chief banker of Sweden. And he just looked at me as if his hackles went up. He said, get out of here, you're harassing me. No chance of a discussion. So that's the mentality we've got in so much of our mainstream media
right
now.
Across the media.
Our mass media is they have decided how things are. The people they employ are just there to regurgitate what the owners and the top editors think. And this is a pretty, scary world, actually. it means we're getting this property. I mean, if you go to the pharmaceutical industry, I know you probably didn't want to talk about that, but this is really important. The pharmaceutical industry is killing people. Saw this is, I think last week it was in the news, a pill called Zantac by GlaxoSmithKline,
yes,
which is used for heartburn. It's been on the market for nearly 10 years. 10 years of people taking this pill day after day after day after day, and then they find out a couple of weeks ago or 10 days ago that it's carcinogenic. It's taken off the market with hardly a whisper.
Tony,
now, hang on a minute.
yeah.
And you expect us to take your vaccinations? You know, but what we're basically getting is we're getting marketing transmitted as if it's science with no questioning through the mass media. I think we've got to be, we have seen a great fall off in the number of vaccinations for young kids. Well, that's partly because the enormous increase where you're having to have 3 injections all at once or 5 injections all at once for newborn children, and partly because the mums and the dads are getting wise to this. This is potentially toxic stuff you're putting into my child, and I'm not having it. And yet they say, oh dear, it's the anti-vaxxers. Well, hang on a minute. I've had vaccinations. I just don't want to have 5 all at once, because I remember meeting a guy who could hardly speak. He was a victim of Gulf War syndrome, and he'd had a load of injections all at once back in the 1990s.
Yeah, and I've interviewed women in America. One amazing woman called Alyssa Nethery, who's a young baby boy, was given 11 vaccinations in one day and died 3 days later. And they have yet to accept responsibility or culpability for that. Tony Gosling is our guest. I'm going to read a couple of tweets. John says, great point by Tony. Putin has thrown a spanner in the works. However, says John, I don't believe the one world government has gone away. He says, maybe they're focused on new ways of achieving it. Instead of forcing 1984 on us, they're allowing us to enslave ourselves by our own narcissism, brave new world style. But great point by Tony, says John. And Sharon Gale, who's a very special woman and a friend of mine on the south coast here in the UK. And Sharon's own story was national news back in the early 2000s. Sharon's child was kidnapped by the state based on risk of future emotional harm. And her story is a cautionary tale for every parent in this country. I've never heard a story like it. I have all the documentation. I've got it all here. I won't get into it. It's all on YouTube if you want to see it. My story, says Sharon, was told to be a no-go for all press and ITV. So was many other vaccine stories, all stitched up by the police in Hampshire. It boils my blood to this day. I'd like to jump into this, Tony. Tony Gosling, The Politics Show, one of the best programmes on radio anywhere in the UK today. It really is, folks. Check it out. thisweek.org.uk. Terrific presentation, great content. You can't beat it. It's great stuff. Tony, I was reading this story. We used to laugh hard at these stories. Now maybe we shouldn't be laughing. So you've got Always, which makes sanitary products for women, and they have done for a long time. And any of us that's lucky enough to have a woman, and I do, we will see some of this stuff around from time to time. They've removed the symbol of Venus from their packaging because it might offend transgender people. And this is one of 1,000 stories like this. You spoke to me about Victoria's Secret. You might get into that. What is this? Is this just a little bit of a fad? I don't mean the trans thing itself. There's always been trans people, but where they are being allowed, or some of them, to dictate to big corporations what they should and shouldn't do, is this going to pass or is it going to get worse, Tony? Because trans women, men who identify as women, can't have menstrual cycles, so Jesus effing Christ, therefore you shouldn't be using sanitary towels, but Always acquiesced and took the Venus symbol away. What's really going on, T?
Well, I think it's about the destruction of the family. That's what it seems to me. The basic, these are just facts to do with people's bodies that you can't really. There's a lot of people that I think that they might prefer to have been the opposite sex, but I honestly don't think it does them any good to try and change what sex they are. when it comes to the Victoria's Secret story, I really laughed out loud when I saw that. They're saying basically that this high street chain, we've seen so many other high street chains, and this is one that goes all over Europe as well, is having all sorts of trouble because they're not catering for transgender people enough, right? Well, I don't know if transgender people have some sort of super amazing spending power. Maybe they do, but I didn't know if they did. And of course, what's really happening here is that there is a problem on the high street with all shops, but they're blaming it on the fact that you're not transgender catering enough at Victoria's Secret. I just find this sort of newsline, this sort of headline, laughable, because it's almost as if everything is being seen through this transgender prism. And, of course, it's actually not normal. And to a certain extent, I can understand why people might wish to offer services to help those who think that they're one sex but not another sex. I'm going quite carefully how I phrase this because, I do understand that some people have a preference for one sex or another sex, but the idea that you can actually change your sex, I don't think it's actually doing the individuals doing it any good at all, Richie. But what it does do is it has a sort of toxic effect on the idea of the traditional family values, and those sorts of, the idea that we should provide a nurturing, simple place that nature gave us for young children. That to me seems the best way to bring up kids. And of course, a lot of this leaches into the idea of pushing these values onto young kids, prepubescent kids at infant school, which I don't think is necessary and healthy. It really confuses these young kids. And it's fine at an older, once you reach the age of maturity, whatever, okay, but not the younger children. And I think most people would agree with that. Some people would say, well, you're transgender phobic or something by saying it.
Nonsense.
I think, kids really do need to steer at a younger age about sexuality. Otherwise, potentially, they can be confused and they could easily be, the idea of bringing sexuality into a child's mind at too early an age can actually make them vulnerable to predators, predatory adults, for example. So we need to be a proper debate about this, which of course isn't happening, because anybody that says that, counters an argument to a transgender argument is labelled as some kind of homophobic, transgender phobic, LGBT phobic or whatever. Arguments and discussions are there to be had, and I'd like to see more of that.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny how hostile that is. I found myself being. I went looking for a story today about Rachel. I don't know if the surname is McKinnon. I'm terrible. It's the trans person who won, the trans woman who won the cycling race, and there's murder over that. The trans woman is actually an academic, but who races cycle bikes or whatever the bloody hell. And looking for more information on the story today, I found that I was blocked by the person on Twitter. Now look, I'm not important, it's not about me, but what it said to me was, even though I never had any contact with that person, it seems like that particular agenda is out looking for any opposition to it, because I would be opposing it. I'd be opposing trans women participating in female sports. I wouldn't want trans women using women's toilets. It seems like they're out looking for the opposition and blocking them on Twitter, because I've had no interaction with this Dr. Rachel McKinnon, but I would have been interested in interviewing the person about, some of the things that they've said. Let me ask you this, T, and thanks for coming back in the programme today. I want to ask you this is important as well, I think. RT.com ran a critical article on its website about the Guardian newspaper. The Guardian newspaper did an interesting little feature, kind of like one of those human interest stories, where they got some British children to try to complete some tasks using equipment and gear from, 30, 40 years ago, to see would the kids be able to use the gadgets maybe that we used when we were younger. Sounds like the plan, right? Sounds like a decent article or just a bit of a throwaway entertaining piece to write or whatever. But anyway, they used, all the kids that were used were all ethnic minority children. And a writer for RT made a very good point about this, wrote a very good article asking about, the article, writing saying that the Guardian article wasn't about diversity. It was actually about, could English kids do a task that, we did when we were back in the 1970s or whatever. And it got me thinking, because they used 6 or 7 children. They were all minority kids, fair enough. I'm watching the Man United match yesterday, Tony, against Liverpool. And Sky News, of course, over-eggs these matches. They give the most boring coverage before the game. You just want the game to bloody start and get on with the bloody game. But you've got these montages. They run these little films with a lovely soundtrack. And the presenter is saying it's the biggest game in British football and all of this. And all of the footage they're showing to you is of black people wearing Liverpool and United gear. Of Asian people wearing Liverpool and United gear. Honest to God, now Tony, I don't have a right wing or alternative right wing bone in my body. But I'm fair and I listen to people. And I'm watching that and I'm thinking, that's deliberate, that. There's something going on there. The vast majority of people...
Well, it might be...
Go on.
I mean, it might be simply that they want to encourage more people of ethnic minorities into the football world or whatever, or into sport, just to make people feel that it's for them. But anyway, it is a bit patronising. But this is about an equality agenda. Well, okay, so there is, of course, an enormous amount of importance in, basically treating everybody equally. But you know what is lost in all of this is the horrific income inequality. So you've got people sleeping in shop doorways in Bristol. We've got something like 150, 200 of them. And we've got the super rich paying no tax at all. And, we're talking about millionaires and billionaires paying zero tax. And yet this is what I think equality is really all about, is they're trying to get all sorts of, everyone interested in, and they're funding all sorts of things around racial equality, sexual equality, which is all well and good, but there's nothing around income inequality and nothing around horrific poverty, which is thrust right in your face. And that, to me, is the real equality that we need to sort out in this, if we're going to make our world a better place.
It's the same
to make sure everybody has been treated decently, got a roof over their head, something to eat, and a glass of water. And then we can start to move on.
Listen, mate, I totally agree with that. We have a huge homeless problem in this city as well, and in the country. And I believe a country is a failed state if you've got people on the streets, nowhere to go, no food. But just finally, I want to just stay with the diversity thing and the positive discrimination thing. Isn't there a danger? And there's a guy called Frank Furedi, who's an academic, he's been on this programme. There's a guy called Stuart Waiton, is an academic who's been on this programme. And they're not right-wing thinkers. And they say there is a danger increasingly in this country particularly, whereby you are treating minority people and minority culture. You're favouring it over the majority culture, and you're seeing a huge problem develop out of that. Obviously a big divide and conquer problem, because the majority culture is like, well, people are bewildered as to what's going on. They're fighting back against it. And I think that area of research is very interesting. I can see it. And again, I'm not a conservative. I can see that. I can see minorities being protected, being afforded protection, being promoted, while at the same time, the majority is going the other way. Now, you probably won't agree with that. Final word to you.
Well, no, I don't really. I think, it's absolutely fine to have events and things which are focused on racial minorities and all sorts of minorities, because what's happening in the wider world is there's a real attempt to get, the Tommy Robinsons and people like this, to get poor people fighting each other. What we're seeing, I think, and this is one of the reasons I think that Halloween really could be Halloween this time, with some sort of crash and attack on the pound. We've got, as you said, I think the last time we spoke, Richie, a kind of social credit system behind the scenes, a secret one going on in Britain anyway. So this is to say anybody with a particular points of view can be quite secretly blacklisted, and gotten out of the way, and the people who have other points of view can be promoted through the system. Think in the background, we've also got Hong Kong, we've got the riots going on there. Other places in South America, in Argentina, Chile, and other parts of South America. We've got the street riots going on in Lebanon. We've got the Barcelona we mentioned earlier. We've got the Yellow Jackets. We've got this enormous thing of bringing all these Remain people into London. Now, I don't know about you. I got a thing through my door about a week ago saying free buses to go to London for the Remain thing.
No way.
I'm also getting Yeah.
Did you? Wow.
So there's obviously money behind this. I would suggest possibly Soros money, Open Society Project money, which is certainly behind Extinction Rebellion, although they refuse to say how much money Soros has paid towards Extinction Rebellion. And what an insane protest on a tube train at Canning Town. Unbelievable, ridiculous, insane, to try and stop a tube train, which is the public transport we want to see, completely bonkers. So I think there's an attempt to destabilise, that's what I'm saying, right across the planet, actually, and that could be a precursor to something much bigger. We shall see.
I don't want to see more tubes. I want to see more Hummers and more Land Rovers on the road, Tony. That's what I want to see.
So you got shares in Humvee, have you?
No, I wish I did. No, but I get pissed off. I've got an old, I've got a diesel estate car. It's 7 or 8 years old, and it does 70 to the gallons. Great economy on the old diesel. I just get pissed off at people telling me you won't have your car in 10 years. I know in my bones that man-made CO2 is not warming the planet. It's not because I want to believe that. I know it's not happening. So I get pissed off when I'm told, you got to use the tube, you got to use the bus. I don't mind that.
Well,
Go on.
Basically, this is something I was thinking about the other day, is the enormous fights and battles we had in the 1970s and 1980s over coal. What we're seeing, of course, with the climate movement, again, is saying that your most plentiful coal supplies, use energy available, and in fact, our technology is such that we could very easily run a very cheap railway system based on coal. I mean, they developed in the 1950s the most efficient and fastest coal-powered locomotives anywhere in the world, brilliantly engineered. But no, you can't have any coal at all. What I think is actually what we've got today is an enormous mass movement of ordinary people who are maybe partly deluded, but they're just backing up this attack on the coal industry that we saw from the multinational oil companies back in the 1970s and the 1980s, smashing the miners' strike and the miners' unions, etc. It links up with what's going on today, I think.
Yeah, I think it does, mate. Hey, listen, come back real soon, will you? Love having you on the programme, going over these issues. Tony Gosling can be heard at the Politics Show in Bristol. It really is kind of last man standing in radio in the UK today. It really is, mate. You know how much I think of the programme. Thisweek.org.uk.
We did a bit on Prometheus on Friday, which was Boris Johnson's speech at the United Nations, and had a really good look at what is he channeling there when he starts talking about Greek myths, the Greek myth of Prometheus bringing fire to mankind. What's he really saying? And I've come to the conclusion, actually, he's the real anti-Semite, because he's attacking the Torah and the Old Testament by going on about Prometheus. Anyway, you can have a look at that if you go on to thisweek.org.uk. And, I think a bit of a sideways, left field take on it. But, how about Boris as the main anti-Semite doing an anti-Semitic speech in the UN, Richie?
I'm going to have a listen. Tony, I always listen to the programme. I haven't heard Friday's episode. I'm going to have a listen to it later on for sure. Thisweek.org.uk, Tony Gosling. And if you want to know anything about Bilderberg, there's only one man to go to, one place to be, bilderberg.org. Thanks, mate, for doing it on a Monday when you're busy. I appreciate that, Tony. Always love having you on, mate. And we'll speak soon.
Cheers, Richie. God bless. Bye-bye.
You too. The terrific Tony Gosling live on the line to us there from Bristol. Top man, Prometheus, eh? Yeah, because I did see some of that speech, obviously. But Tony's analysis of that'll be fascinating, that. Thisweek.org.uk. Before we go any further, let's have the headlines, will we, from FSN, because God only knows what I'd be without you. This is the headlines, FSN, The Richie Allen Show. The time is 9 minutes past the hour. It's Monday's programme. Where else would you rather be? Back in a couple of minutes. Well, back in 30 seconds even.
From Feature Story News in London, I'm Ollie Barrett. Canada's voting on Monday in a general election with Justin Trudeau's party braced to possibly lose ground. The British government is making a second attempt to hold a meaningful vote on Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Brexit deal. 5 people have been killed in the latest unrest in Chile, and Prince Harry's responded to speculation about a rift with his brother Prince William, admitting that they are on different paths.
We're on different paths. We don't like each other anymore, William and Harry. How interesting. 10 minutes past 6 it is. It's Monday the 21st of October 2019. My name is Richie Allen. Going to be with you for another 25 minutes or thereabouts. Thank God I got on the air today. I'm not going to tell you, mad day. Oh, Jesus. If there was a camera following me around 24/7, you'd die of boredom. No, you wouldn't actually. Believe you me, you would not die of boredom. Crazy life, so it is. Lots of great people coming on the radio show this week. If I remember, I'll tell you before the end of the programme. Don't forget also is that I do present a kind of a newspaper review every Monday to Thursday at 9:30 a.m. on YouTube, youtube.com/Richie Allen Show. It's just a bit of a giggle looking at the newspapers in the UK. Give me 60 seconds, back with you, and I'm going to read a nice email that I had, and I've dug out an old bit of radio from the Richie Allen Show. I've never done this before and I won't do it again, but it's very pertinent. Even Tony Gosling talking about vaccines, very pertinent. Back with you in 60 seconds.
Renowned healer Mark Byersky travels the world to find the most unique and powerful crystals for self-healing. Since the ancient times, crystals have been used as healing tools. They hold a natural healing vibration and are highly charged in positive energy. Mark teaches how to channel the universal energy and transfer it to the crystal to activate its healing power. Each crystal is used for its unique ability to target a different physical or emotional challenge. Mark Byersky is an author, healer, speaker, and founder of the Pure Energy Healing Academy. He shares powerful messages of inspiration and healing on his daily YouTube videos, reaching millions worldwide. Mark's crystals, healing oils, and incense sticks are most sought after by other healers. His collection is available online at www.markbyersky.com. His work is presented through Lemon House, a company that creates and curates consciously made gifts.
Welcome back to the programme. I'm going to play this song, then we'll come back. I'll read an email and we've got an interesting bit of audio for you. We're going back 2 years and a month. Something I'd forgotten entirely about, but a lady sent me an email and I dug it out. And it came in handy today, actually, funnily enough, of all days. I really like this song. It's an absolute unashamed rip-off of Jolene by Dolly Parton, as pointed out by Natalie Stacey, long-time listener to the Richie Allen Show. It's unashamedly a rip-off, but it's a good song. I like it. So we'll have this, then we'll come back on your Richie Allen Show. This is Mark Ronson and the mad woman whose name I can't remember right now. Right, Mark Ronson, I think it's Miley Cyrus. The reason I can't see, you see, it's just got a number to it. It says the name of the song, Nothing Breaks Like a Heart, but it's just got a number on it. I'm sexist, you see. I knew Mark Ronson was behind it. Hi to Natalie, hi to David Stanford, to Joe Public as well, to Richard Angelis. Great surname there, yeah. We should campaign for bigger and safer cars with wider roads, says Richard. I'm having some David today, you know. Everything that could go wrong is going wrong. My mouse now is not working. You know when that happens to the mouse? You know when the mouse won't follow your movements and it gets static and you've got to pick it up and put it down like that and the little cursor doesn't move? It's just absolutely fucking pissing me off. It's like a Monday thing. It's all happening here. I'm trying to fire jingles and stings and music and the bloody mouse is not working. Hi to Sean, who says Patrick Stewart paid for coaches from Yorkshire to the People's Vote in March, according to the Yorkshire Post. Did he? Who did he play? Picard, was it? Picard in Star Trek. And I've had an email from James Gospel. James is in Yorkshire as well, funny enough, and he says, Richie, I dare you. You won't play that bit of music you played earlier on when you were talking about breasts, will you? Would you possibly play it again, Richie? I will, because I don't have to answer to anybody. And taste and decency, well, they come and go. Sometimes we're professional. Sometimes we act like the programme was being broadcast on national radio. And other times we just act like a bunch of children. And today is one of those days.
Get your tits out, get your tits out, get your tits out.
For the lads.
Get your tits out. For the lads.
For the lads.
Get your tits out, get your tits out, get your tits out for the lads. Get your tits out for the lads. Get your tits out, get your tits out, get your tits out.
Don't dare me to do something, because I'll just do it, you know. If he said jump off a bridge, wouldn't you jump off a bridge, Richie? Well, if there was water under it, I probably would. I've jumped off of many a cliff and many a bridge into deep water before. That's something I like to do. Right, I had an email. Listen up. This is from Emma Clancy. And I wasn't going to do this till later on in the week, but it came in really handy today because of my mad day. Big thanks to Tony Gosling today, by the way. Jesus wept. I can't do anything with the mouse. The mouse is just not working for me. Let me read this email. Dear Richie, my name is Emma Clancy. I'm a new mother and I haven't consented to my child being vaccinated yet. Emphasis on the yet, Richie. I came across your show after a friend sent me a recent episode about the media advertising vaccines. It was about Sky News. So she's a recent convert. Well, not convert, a recent listener to the show. I did a show about 2 weeks ago, taking the piss out of Sky, basically acting as an infomercial for vaccines. That was fine. And I did that show. So that's how Emma came. My friend said to me, Richie, that a few years ago, you did a show about Sky News pushing vaccines. And in the show, you demonstrated how Sky switched doctors. One doctor was substituted for another because the first doctor didn't recommend the flu vaccine strongly enough for everyone. Can you send me a link to the show? Because I'm gathering evidence, not just for me, but for a friend of mine who's pregnant and for everybody else in my circle of friends. Yours sincerely, Emma Clancy. Thanks for making your show. Emma let me know where she is, but asked me not to mention it. I think, as somebody who's new to the show, she might be worried about expressing opinions about vaccines, particularly if she has a young child. Right, now, I didn't know what the bloody hell she was talking about. And I done a bit of digging. And what I had to do was I had to put search terms into a search engine because I've had a go at Sky News on my radio shows probably 700 times in the last 5 years. And I didn't know what she was bloody talking about. I had a vague recollection of it because my great friend and colleague Jean Ann Crowley, I remember a couple of years ago, Jean Ann said to me, she was very complimentary, and she said, that little segment you done, that little monologue there, that's very important, hold on to that. And of course I didn't hold on to it, forget about it. One show bleeds into another, you're only as good as the show you did yesterday, and I didn't mark the programme, so I had no idea, but I managed to dig it out. With the help of some bloke who uploads my programmes to his own YouTube channel. And he doesn't monetize them to his credit, or hasn't tried to anyway. And apparently back in September of 2017, 2 years ago and a month ago, 2 years and a month ago, there was an amazing bit of skullduggery by Sky News, and I happened to catch it. And I'm going to play it now for Emma Clancy, and it's really timely, because today and pretty much for the rest of the week, the news media in this country is going to be telling you as often as it can to get your flu jab. So this is from 2 years ago, and it's going to take me a second now to play this because the mouse just won't work. Alright, the Richie Allen Show, as far as I understand, Tuesday, September 12th, 2019. Now some of you might want to mark that because you can find it, I think, on Podomatic, but you can also find it on other YouTube channels. People who they don't steal, but they upload content that's relevant to their own channels, which I don't mind anybody doing that. You can put my show on your channel so long as you don't try and make money from it, because I'll fucking kill you if I ever find you. It's hard enough to make this program as it is without somebody else taking money for it, right? Okay. So Tuesday, September 12th, 2017, this is from the monologue. And because the guy recorded it off of his own computer, the sound is not the quality you would expect from the Richie Allen radio show, but it's still good enough for you to hear what's going on. And I was really intrigued listening back to this today because it's the first time I've heard it in over 2 years. And bloody hell, it was Sky News with its trousers down in 2017. And this might be of use to you. Of course, I've gained a lot of listeners since then. The programme gets downloaded nearly 1 million times a month. The podcast does. That's true, by the way. Nearly 1 million times a month it gets downloaded. iTunes, Spotify and Podomatic. A lot of people won't have heard this. Shut up and play it, you big baldy gammon. Alright, I will then. Here it is. Me, back in 2017, talking about Sky. Very, very interesting. Marvellous. Have a listen to this. Again, it's the amazing Kay Burley.
NHS is warning of a big increase in pressure from the flu virus this winter. Comes after hospitals in Australia and New Zealand struggle to cope with a particularly heavy flu season. Outbreaks often come ahead of major flu epidemics here in Europe. With me is GP Dr. Daisy Bennett. Hello, Doctor. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
How worried are we?
Oh, Dr. Daisy Bennett is very, very worried. We need to vaccinate everybody in the NHS. And pretty much everyone else too, says the doctor.
We need to have plans in place because we don't want a crisis, we don't want a disaster. We need to make sure that we're prepared. So on top of the practical steps that you can make, which is having beds available and having staff on duty to make sure that they're covering all the shifts, we also need to make sure that the NHS staff themselves are healthy, so therefore they need their flu jabs as well. So the staff need to be healthy and not off sick with flu, so it's very important that NHS staff is vaccinated as well with the flu vaccination, as well as, of course, the patients.
Who should have the jabs?
So all the vulnerable patients, so patients who are over 75, patients with chronic diseases, so long-term lung conditions, heart conditions, diabetes, asthma, respiratory problems like chronic pulmonary disease, all of these conditions make these patients more vulnerable to complications of flu. And the complications of flu are, as you can imagine, the obvious one is pneumonia, and that can be quite debilitating and obviously, and as well, cause death as well.
Yeah, now Dr. Daisy Bennett said that old people with pulmonary obstructive disorder, people with asthma, but old people should have the jab. That's what she said, right? Remember, Burley said, who should have the jab? She said some very old people. She said people with what you would call chronic bronchial type conditions should have the jab. Remember this. This is vital now that you keep that in mind, right? Get the vaccine. Now, the pneumonia claim she made is proper scaremongering, this idea that flu lends to or can develop into pneumonia. That's incredibly, incredibly rare. This is an annual push by the UK media, right? You know, when you've done programmes like mine for many years, and this programme will be 3 years old on Friday, but I've been doing programmes like it for a long time, the same stories prop up or even pop up every year at the same time. It's an annual push, this. They scaremonger the hell out of people in the autumn to make sure the uptake of the vaccine, the flu vaccine, meets their targets. And would you believe me if I told you the targets are not set by doctors, but are set by the manufacturers? They are. They own, effectively, the World Health Organization because of something called a revolving door system. Senior officials at the WHO, and I've done this, I've named these people before, have worked for Merck, Glaxo, and all the rest of them. The World Health Organization sets the targets. Do you get me? Right? So, Dr. Daisy Bennett, everybody in the NHS needs the vaccine. Old people, people that are prone to chesty, bronchial breathing type things, Dr. Daisy Bennett. Now, pay attention. And know that I would never, ever, ever tell you a lie. What was extraordinary about this today is that obviously somebody at Sky News Central thought that young Dr. Daisy Bennett didn't do very well. And I shit you not, less than 45 minutes later, Burley reread the story, understandably, because they do the same stories every hour, right? Did they use the recording of Dr. Daisy Bennett? Fuck no, they didn't, because Daisy Bennett forgot her lines. This time Burley reread the story, and this time she interviewed Dr. David Lloyd. And David Lloyd had learned his lines better than the previous doctor.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. How concerned are you about what's happening in Australia and subsequently what might happen here?
Oh, I think we should all get quite concerned. This is the time when we should be really working very hard to make sure that our population is protected against flu, because the health service is hardly in the best condition, so we want to have as few people admitted to hospital as we can. So over the next month or two is when everybody who is at risk of catching flu really ought to get to their GP or their pharmacist and get vaccinated straight away.
So why did David Lloyd come on the programme, really? Well, it's for the next question. Go on, Kay, ask the question again. Who should get it?
Who's that? Who's most at risk?
So anybody over the age of 65, anybody with a chronic illness, particularly liver disease, lung disease, heart disease, every child between the ages of 2 and 3, all the children in their first years.
Get in there!
I'm going to have to look up all the lists now.
Look up the list, David.
School children, classes 1, 2, 3 and 4. Anybody that's living in a residential or a nursing home. Anybody, importantly, who is well but is a carer for someone who isn't very well. And all frontline health and social care workers should be vaccinated against the flu. That's very, very important. So we should all have 100% pickup. So we've extended the range of children that we'd like to vaccinate this year.
Oh, Jesus, we've extended the range of children we'd like to vaccinate this year. We want to vaccinate grades 1, 2, 3, 4, old people, young people, people who work with elderly people. We want to vaccinate lollipop ladies. Fucking everybody needs to be vaccinated, says Dr. David Lloyd. Dr. David Lloyd. Dr. Daisy Bennett said, old people, anybody that's got asthma, bronchial stuff, that's about right. Said Dr. Daisy Bennett. Listen to what Dr. David Lloyd says next about why it's so important to vaccinate more and more children. You're not going to believe it.
This year, because there was some very good research a couple of weeks ago which showed that if you vaccinate young children, it actually protects not only the children, but it protects the vulnerable elderly as well from getting the flu. So we want to vaccinate an awful lot more people this year so that we can stop them getting the flu.
Jump in anytime you want, Kay. Kay, anytime you want, jump in. He just said research shows, wait for it, that when children get vaccinated, old people don't get the flu. Now, I listened back to this 17 times today, then another 23 times, then I had a break, then I went for a wee, I came back, had a cup of tea, then I listened to it another 50 times. He just said research shows that when children get vaccinated, old people don't get the flu. Kay Burley should have jumped down his throat.
If you vaccinate young children, it actually protects not only the children, but it protects the vulnerable elderly as well from getting the flu. So we want to vaccinate an awful lot more people this year.
Yeah, I'm going to play it again, and I might keep playing it until 9 o'clock. This is incredible, this.
If you vaccinate young children, it actually protects not only the children, but it protects the vulnerable elderly as well from getting the flu. So we want to vaccinate an awful lot more people this year.
So Kay Burley jumped in, right? She said, well, I didn't come across that particular study. That sounds bizarre to me, David Lloyd. Would you like to explain that? She didn't. You know, you're shouting at the telly, go on, Kay, go on, Kay. Ask him to explain that madness. Go on, Kay. What does Kay say? Kay says this.
Sounds as though almost everybody will need one of these injections. If you can't get to the GP, you mentioned pharmacy there. The pharmacist can do it as well?
Everybody needs it. Everybody wants some. Everybody needs it. Everybody in the world. It's amazing that not a journalistic bone, not only in her body, but in anybody working in mainstream media. Hey, David Lloyd, listen, we're sick of this bullshit, man. You're telling us today that the Aussies are worried about flu and they had a rough winter and we better watch out now. And what about the bird flu, the swine flu, the Asian flu? What about all that bollocks that never materialised, David? All of these scares. And we all rushed like feck to the chemist, to the doctor, to get jabbed with a toxic cloud of shit, which didn't do any good because there was no flu epidemic anyway. Probably done us more harm. Never materialised. Imagine how bad you have to be at your job. And I've never set myself on any pedestal as being any sort of special presenter. I'm not. Bloody well good at what I do. I'm not the best. I'm not special. Imagine a guy says, We're encouraging more children to get vaccinated because, well, recent research shows that when more children take it up, believe it or not, it prevents the elderly from getting the flu.
If you vaccinate young children, it actually protects not only the children, but it protects the vulnerable elderly as well from getting the flu. So we want to vaccinate an awful lot more people this year.
Yeah, he should be... I've got to be very careful. Libel exists. People can sue people for libel. Not going to say what should happen to him. What happens when people get vaccinated is whatever they are vaccinated with, they begin to shed. It's more likely that when people are carrying around the antibodies of the flu, it's more likely that people will begin to get the flu. Go into any GP surgery over the winter and you'll see the girls on reception. They're usually girls, I'm not being sexist, sneezing and coughing. I've seen it in my own surgery. Monumental bollocks that, eh? Recent evidence says children get vaccinated, it actually helps protect the elderly against the flu. No challenge. No challenge from Kay Burley. Yeah, that was 2 years ago. Sorry for the sound quality of that there, but I didn't take it from my own archive. I'd forgotten all about that. Sky News using a doctor to talk about the flu vaccine. And she says, well, older people and people who have had cardiac issues or pulmonary artery issues or bronchial issues or respiratory issues or whatever, generally people with asthma, we'd be worried about them. And within an hour, Sky, who would have ordinarily taken the recording of Dr. Daisy, right, and then used it for the rest of the day, realised that, well, this is not good enough. She hasn't gone as far as she's supposed to go. So they hastily brought Dr. David Lloyd in. I made a big... It all came back to me today. Made a big deal of this at the time. I wouldn't be aware of this if it wasn't for an email from a listener called Emma. But that's an extraordinary bit of evidence. And evidence is powerful. When people are arguing with you, not so much about the efficacy of vaccines. That's an argument for, well, not for just another day, but for every other day. But when it comes to vaccines being pushed on society by a willing media that asks no questions, that's a glaring example of it. In fact, that's the worst example of it you'll ever find. Jesus, Daisy didn't say what she should have said, which is that everybody and his grandmother, his sisters, his aunties, his uncles, everybody should get it. She didn't do that, so let's get another guy in quick as you can, at the speed of light, and do the segment again. And this time he'll give a different answer. So yeah, thanks to Emma Clancy for that email. Fascinating that. Yeah, I'd forgotten all about that. Completely forgotten about it. And it's very, 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 very useful, that. And it's timely because right now, this week, it's been in the press today. It'll be in the press tomorrow. You all need to go and get your flu jab, don't you? Let me say hi to Phil Restino in Florida, a good friend of mine. How you doing, Phil? Who said, Tony Gosling is spot on, Richie. All this talk about this kind of inequality and that kind of inequality. But let's talk about the obscene income and wealth inequality. Here, Tony, says Phil Restino in Florida there. Thanks so much for that, Phil. Great to hear from you, pal. Right, that's about it for me for today then. Thanks. 2 guests tomorrow. Thanks to Tony Gosling. Back to the full 2 hours tomorrow. You had to make do with an hour and 35 minutes today. You'll take it and you'll like it, so you will. Enjoy the rest of your Monday evening. I've not got the diary to hand, but I've got some terrific guests coming up this week for you. Packed out show this week with guests, really interesting subjects, people you haven't heard from before, which is always good. So I look forward to that. In the meantime, you and I will talk again tomorrow at 9:30 when we review the newspapers on YouTube. That's youtube.com/Richie Allen Show. That's /Richie Allen Show, youtube.com. Yeah, and I'm going to leave you with some Rod Stewart. Why not? Here's Rod. See you tomorrow. Bye for now. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. Look, take care of yourselves. Bye.